Hi everyone, welcome back to the episode or second episode of Connections podcast with me, Otani Nekiomado, and Carl Daly. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good mate. Just kind of busy week, bouncing all around the place, but good to be here. Good to be having a second chat. How about yourself? How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I had a pretty full on weekend. Ended up going to see Dave Chappelle. Actually, it was that
Really?
was that was pretty good. Yeah, that was really good.
Oh
It's really
man,
interesting. So basically, he makes you lock up all your phones. Everyone locks up their phones in these little pouches, and then that's it. You've got no technology, no filming, and all this kind of
that's
stuff, and
quality. I
getting
like that.
distracted. So yeah, it was a pretty good show. Really
That's
enjoyed it.
excellent. Great call. I like that.
Yeah.
Totally
So
present.
sorry.
Being totally present is the thing, you know.
Yeah, it's pretty cool actually. It was just the guy's a genius. Basically, I've been a fan for many years, so it was good
It's
to
hilarious.
see him live. Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
funny.
he's amazing.
Yeah. Right. So like we said on the last episode, our main objective for this podcast is to help as much as possible in terms of bringing clarity to the idea that the mind is one of the main drivers for. In fact, I feel the main driver for building the body you want to build or building kind of anything in life. So if you're sort of fully invested mentally, you're gonna go pretty far in what you're trying to achieve. Um, Last week we kind of introduced the idea that we've written this book and we want to obviously figure out if there's any interest in sort of exploring some of the subjects that we've written about. So week on week, we're going to talk about some of the things that's in the book and go, okay, if you want to obviously expand on it and sort of dive deeper into it, it's obviously a good idea to kind of purchase this book, and we're trying to see if there's any interest in any of this. So this week, we're going to talk a little bit about self-talk, which for me, I think is one of the most important parts of training. Because as we know, words are very powerful. So your ability to say the right things to yourself around what you're doing is gonna impact a lot about how you kind of how you develop. What do you think about that, Carl?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a massive factor in lots of well, a lot of the things we have in the book and what we talk about. Actually, there's a bit of a golden thread going through is around when someone else isn't around. I mean, part of our, I guess, idea behind what we're talking about, and particularly the book, is the work we do. Often we partner with clients. We we're coaches in different ways, and that's great for someone to kind of hold space for you and help guide you. But there's also times you're not with a coach 24/7. So what's going through your head when you're training by yourself or doing whatever by yourself? Is that an inner coach or is it an inner critic? And yeah, that's, I think, part of what we want to talk about today. Well, lots of different elements of self-talk, but yeah, it weaves through everything.
Yeah. I mean, just before we got on, obviously we try to have a little bit of a chat of what we're gonna discuss today in our podcast, and I think one of the things I mentioned, I don't know, is this idea of the self talk for me. When I think about how self talk works for me personally, and kind of what I try and convey to my clients is what is it you deserve. I suppose a lot of people kind of don't really try and build what they feel they deserve. So for example, what I would talk about is most people's bodies form without intention. So if your body forms without intention, it's going to be a however way it kind of just forms. But if you're now sort of have this visualization of what it is you feel like you deserve, it's going to kind of impact how you talk to yourself about what you are like around food, what you're like around training, your intensity, and how kind of that brings about what it is you kind of want to have sort of come to life. So I suppose the focus I kind of want you to kind of think about now, or kind of invite you to kind of consider, is the body you feel like you deserve comes down to, if you feel like you deserve something and you're not willing to work for it, then that's just entitlement, right? But if you are quite ambitious about creating this amazing body that feels good, that is strong, that kind of like it just kind of serves you through your life, it takes a lot of ambition and it takes a lot of hard work. And then once you kind of buy into that as a concept, then you kind of walk into this thing that you feel like you deserve. So these kind of ways you speak to yourself around this is what's going to be responsible for how you build yourself up. Because if you have convinced yourself, or you put other people on a pedestal and go, they have this because they're better than me, or because they have these sort of, I don't know, genetic advantage, this, that, and the other, then you kind of set yourself up for, I can't do this. But if you set yourself up and going, okay, that looks like a difficult thing to do, but I believe I can do that. These ideas, I don't know, they build you up, and this is quite an important way to frame things to kind of get the best outcome.
Yeah, building on that actually, because you sparked thought in my head there, Tanya, around like self-worth.
Yeah,
That's a big thing. We talk about society at the moment and well-being and whatever else, but a lot of self-worth links to what you're saying. Like, do I feel I deserve this? And as you said, I like the differentiation you make between being entitled. What that involves. But self-worth or lack thereof is very much, I think, informed or sustained by our self-talk. And sometimes we're conscious of that, sometimes we're not conscious of it. And I know I've through my life had to do work on that and be very conscious around how you speak to yourself,
all right.
because you might think it's just a throwaway comment, but if that's kind of always there picking away, it's like with self-talk. One of the things, I'm going to jump in ahead a little bit, but a question always framed to people on this topic is, would you let anybody else speak to you like that, the way you speak to yourself?
Yeah,
If it's more negative. Or would you speak to somebody else like that? And more often than not, the answer is no. So
yeah,
why would you speak to yourself like that?
yeah.
Particularly if it's not a supportive narrative going on in your head. So anyway, that's kind of jumping ahead in terms of framing this, but exactly to your point, I think, Tanya, a big part of that. What do you see that you deserve? And I think that's an important starting point often, because
Yeah.
then when you say, well, I feel that, and you've given me some good examples of that, Tanya, that you've seen, but then you put the work in, and that's part of some of the other stuff that we discuss and have in the book, is like, well, what are the steps to get to that point? But that could probably make or break the best plan in the world.
Yeah.
But if you don't feel that you deserve it, or you've got that value in yourself or self worth, then you're going to struggle.
So in terms of, I don't know, the science behind self-talk, so where would you say it originates from, and how do you build it? How do you if you're obviously in a place where you're at the moment speaking to yourself quite negatively, or you're kind of not in a very positive place of how you speak to yourself, what are the sort of strategies people can use to kind of start to build that up and start to kind of maneuver themselves into more positive self-talk and really utilizing this tool? For me, I always consider it as a tool, or a skill to develop self-talk. And the thing is, it's interesting because I think when I first not discovered it a while ago, it's just like not everyone has self-talk. Some people kind of see things more, they hear things more, they kind of like more sort of like pictorial in their mind.
Yeah.
But like it's always something that is very, very powerful in terms of my mind. It's like, in fact, I think I got it from my mum actually, if I'm honest. My mum always used to say to me, be careful what you say to yourself
Yeah,
about
yeah.
yourself, right? So it's one of those things where I think
Likewise.
it's a super important sort of tool to build anything you want out of life. So how do you think, or what's the science behind recognizing that you've been saying negative things to yourself, and then obviously start to change that language?
I think we should lean on your mother's wisdom, and that could be the title of this, episode, is be careful what you
Yeah.
say to yourself. 'Cause that sums it up really. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge amount of like science ultimately. I mean, where does this come from? It comes from a lot of different areas. I think the simplest way of talking about it would be, this kind of whole nature nurture concept in I guess psychology or anthropology, whatever, sociology, which is essentially the things that inform who we are today across lots of different aspects of us, our values and various things. But what one is, what's in our nature, what's our personality, how do we tend to operate? You could even have two twins who, were born, obviously as being twins at the same time, but same environment, but they would still have different personalities. That's the kind of nature piece. Where the
Yeah.
nurture is actually how was I brought up? What was my environment, particularly in those early years, that tends to shape a lot of our outlook and perspective. But that continues the nurture piece because
Yeah.
that's the societies we live in, the people we surround ourselves with, now what we look at on social media,
Mm.
and take on board. So that can probably more than ever else, that nurture thing as adults
Yeah.
has a really significant impact because we're getting flooded with so much information and perspectives, and not all of it's accurate and not all
Mm.
of it's helpful. And that's one thing I think, actually, when we think back to a time that sparked us having these conversations around how a lot of social media is actually, I mean, in this area, topic areas, a lot of disinformation, a lot of buzzwords, a lot of things like that, but it's not particularly helpful. And we've heard a lot about, you talk about, when you watch a lot of movies, you watch these Marvel movies and these people are so ripped and just look
Yeah.
incredible, and you can do that, but to some degree, it's like, well, is that realistic if you work, I mean, a 60-hour week and you've got kids to look after and all those types of things. So where do you find the balance? So that's looking a long way of answering. That's where it tends to come from, I
Yeah.
think. And there's a huge amount of research into this for anyone who's interested. We could spend an hour talking about just that. I think the second part of your question is really then, well, okay, so what? How do I know it? And even if I don't know it, and I think it's very common when I work with people in terms of when I say, what's your inner monologue saying to you? And
Mm.
people say, I don't know. I'm not sure. So it's not really conscious, but then there's ways to tap into it, I think. And that is always the first stage, is kind of becoming more conscious of your self-talk. And I think there is strategies to do that, sometimes to pause and reflect back and say, you know, I mean, I still have to work at this. And I can tell you the main place I do it is in the golf course when I hit a bad shot.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, oh, never mind, Carl, try better next time. I'm calling myself every name under the sun. That's not helpful.
Right.
It might just seem like a throwaway comment in the moment, but actually that stuff builds up because, the brain works in interesting ways, and it's quite literal in some ways. So if
Mm.
you tell it things repeatedly, it will start to believe that.
Right.
That can impact your actually ability to be effective in certain situations because you're just telling yourself, I am crap at this, I'm crap at this, I'm useless, you're an idiot. That is not a throwaway comment. The whole
Yeah.
famous adage of, sticks and stones will break my bones, words will never hurt me, as we know, is not true. Both, and that works also as an inner monologue, or even just if you're shouting like
Yeah.
me in the golf course out loud. But so it's the starting point is awareness, I think. And as I said, there's ways to kind of pause. I mean, whether it's meditation or just being in the moment, particularly in stressful scenarios, if something's not
Mm.
going well, it's like just reflect back and say, was I kind of saying to myself, oh, you messed up, you're stupid, you should have done that, or you kind of saying, okay, don't worry, it's not as bad as you think. That's what we mean. They're examples of inner talk.
Yeah.
Um, and then, I mean, I guess there's a few other things that I might be jumping ahead here, Tanya. You can guide me, but I think you always that's the first place to start, and then there's a next level of that, which is often about I find sometimes people could be quite, including myself, by the way, we can be quite definitive in some of that talk. So do you say kind of like, oh, that was a silly thing to say, or do you say I'm an idiot, right?
Mm.
And they're two different things because maybe it
Yeah.
was a silly thing to say, and that's just a fact. And you
Yeah.
think, okay, well, I just need to be aware of that next time. You learn from it versus designating yourself something, and that's quite dangerous
Mm.
as well.
That's quite dangerous.
And
Yeah.
that's back to your thing on self worth. Could be like, oh, I'm not good at this thing. I can't train. I'm never, and you're like, they're quite binary statements because it's like
Yeah.
it is what it is in the way that's said, and
Yeah.
it's like that. I don't deserve this. That could be
Mm.
something that's in the back of your head. So I think the key thing, and I mean, this might be, it's a lot to probably cover in one day, but what you ultimately want to try and do, as I say, the starting point is self awareness. The end point is try to reframe that. So things like, oh, I messed up, I'm an idiot, is going to say, well, let's look at the facts. Does that make you stupid? No.
Mm.
Is it that's, how bad is this? Okay, I didn't get it right this time, but I'm going to learn from it and do it better next time. That's kind of a reframing.
Yeah.
And then also just thinking about, well, what did you do well? I know I got a great advice a number of years back of someone who suggested, and I've got it here somewhere, my little diary here. I can show it's right in front of me, so I keep it right here every morning. So it's kind of three things you're grateful for, but three things you did well the day before, to be conscious of it.
Nice.
So that is a practical strategy because we often, because the way our brains work, the brain's trained to look at risk. It's trained to almost, I mean, I don't want to say negativity, but it tends to be because it's always looking out for, oh, that's not good, that's not bad. That's how our brains evolved. we don't often reflect back and go, I did that really well, or that's something I'm good at, or I do well.
Right.
And that practical sometimes just say what three things it could be nothing. It's like, oh, I finally sent an email to HMRC to sort out that thing. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter, but it's like you're framing on something I did well, and that helps train your brain to be a bit more complimentary at times to balance
Yeah.
out maybe the self-critic.
You
Anyway,
know
a lot of
what's
stuff. That's a lot of info, Tanya.
No, no, no. The thing is, it's really interesting because obviously, as you were talking about this, I'm thinking about kind of what I do as well. And this is what me and you've been doing for years, is just kind of like bouncing these ideas off each other. But it's like, I keep on trying to get across to people is, I know it's going to sound a little bit arrogant, is I've always had a high belief in myself. Like, I've always felt like, yeah, I can do that. Like, I might not be able to do it yet, but if I keep on trying, I'll be able to do it. So again, this language for me is why I say it's been so powerful. I mean, the other day I was training one of my clients, and we kind of started doing this session, and I kind of let her do a set of deadlifts. And I always noticed sort of like some of my clients, they kind of drift off into work, or sometimes they're present, sometimes they're not. So I let her do the set. I knew what the answer was going to be straight away before she even finished. But I said to her, why are you doing that? What were you thinking? And she just said nothing. I was just like, nothing. But the thing is, I suppose the point of literally what we're doing right now and trying to develop is having people ask, just really figure out that thinking nothing doesn't work when you're trying to train or you're trying to achieve anything in life. You have to be as focused as you can. So like I said, when I'm going to go into the gym, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to walk into the gym, I'm going to be super focused, all right? This is a conversation I'm already having. And while I'm doing my session, I'm going, okay, now it's time to really focus up. Because I suppose the long and short of it is, to be the healthiest you want to be, you have to put heavy pressure on the body, right? When you're putting heavy pressure on the body, it's risky. So if you're doing this without thought, you're more likely to get injured. So what I was trying to convey to people is, my biggest pride when it comes to doing this job is I want my clients to become more analytical. I want them to be able to analyze what they're doing as they're working, and I want them to be able to kind of see how technical they're being and how intense they're being. You can't really do these things if you're not really thinking about it, right? So I said to her, what are you thinking? She said, nothing. So I said, look, here's what needs to happen, right? You need to be thinking about what you're trying to achieve, what this exercise you want it to do to your body. You need to visualize how you feel about what this exercise is going to do to your body, right? Then you need to be kind of going, okay, is everything I'm doing in alignment? And then intentionally instructing your body. It's a command from brain to body. The idea of push, the idea of pull, the idea of contract, the idea of squeeze. Speak to your body, because it's self talk, but it's an instruction. So everything we're doing is your brain involved in what you're doing? And again, on top of that, now is, I'm strong. I believe I can do this. I believe that I can do hard things. I believe in doing hard things. So all these kind of things, it kind of starts to frame you, or push you along the path of, you don't see exercise as, I don't know, like a chore. You see it as something that's really, really good for you. So all these things that you say to yourself, and you say to yourself regularly, it builds this character, it builds this new person in you. So it's interesting how, again, how it's important to self-talk, but people don't know that they should be doing that. People kind of just want to just move and go through the motions, and not really go, okay, I should be having a little bit of a chat inside my brain. And is the chat positive, is the chat negative? So back to what you're saying is, being aware that even if you are talking to yourself, or if you're not, being aware of what the language is you're using with yourself. All these things are very important, but it's like, you have to find that awareness of the self-talk, because if you don't find it and then try and think about it as an important skill to try and develop, you probably won't try and develop it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally, totally. And actually, what you're saying there helps link back to what we talked about last week, actually, which I know we'll come on to do a bit more on, but framing it around your why,
Yeah.
which is the first part. You going in and you get the example yourself. When you're going in, is like part of that self-talk is reminding yourself,
Why are you
you
going
know, I
in
have to
there?
think if you had a coach there, what are they telling you? And it's like, well, right, you know, they'd be, you know, like you'd see an Olympian or something like that. They're saying them, right, remember the vision, remember what we talked about. You know, that's what the person will be saying. Remember
Yeah,
why we're here. And
yeah,
that's part of the self-talk. So you can do that for yourself. Like, why am I doing this? You know, it's, you know, we're coming out of summer now in this part of the world that, you know, I went out for a run this morning. It was dark. It was cold. I'm like, okay, you know, I need a little bit more tuning into why are you doing this to get that motivation going.
yeah,
Um, and you know, had a conversation earlier, Tanya, around actually the topic of motivation. This is probably something for another day, but I think there is a linking point here in that, like, you know, motivation can be fleeting, right? You'll know this, you know, as I say, come in the example, maybe are you present or not? Whereas some of this stuff is more about then the consistency,
yeah,
you know, because you know, I saw an interesting few things this week. They just popped up randomly on like LinkedIn. I was watching, I think, and one was Ronaldo, the footballer. One was I can't remember, one of the heavyweight boxers. But anyway, they were talking about, I don't like going to the gym every day. You know, I don't feel just like, yes, gym, happy days.
yeah,
But it's about the commitment and the dedication.
mm,
And I think even what they were talking about in slightly different ways was how they talk to themselves and
yeah,
how they kind of remind themselves of, well, I'm doing this because I've got a bigger picture vision why.
mm,
And so they've got a very conscious and, you know, supporting inner coach that is
yeah,
focusing them towards achieving their why and reminding them of why they're there.
yeah,
Now, they will have had a lot of help with that. They will have had sports psychologists and things like that to guide them through that process. But
yeah,
it's, you know, for the top performers in both sports and life and you know, in the corporate world or work world, I think these are very, very relevant points also, as you said, you know,
yeah,
Tanya. And I think, sorry, the last point I'll mention is because you know, this is relevant to, you know, I think that you asked the question all around like what types of things influence that inner talk, you know, and sometimes
yeah,
it's contextual. So what environment are we in right now? As I said, can trigger. I mean, that's another point of, you know, how you become more aware. What might trigger positive self talk or other self talk, and sometimes the environment we're in. You know,
mm,
so I think people, you know, when I work with people in their jobs, it's often like, oh, you know, when I was in a situation with people who I perceived as more senior than me, or they were more senior than me, you might start thinking, oh, you know, you go into a more negative
yeah,
perspective. So that's relevant as well. The context you're in, and
mm,
being then all the more aware of like, am I still kind of being supportive? And you know, it's not always just being, you know, you can't just go also swing and be like, I just need to be super positive all the time and
yeah,
be arrogant. I mean, the example you said earlier on, I don't think that's arrogant because it's quite self-aware and it's good what you did, but you also are tuned into, well, what do I need to learn from, and what
mm,
might I not have done as well as I could have. So this isn't just about being happy clappy, because I mean a lot of self-development gurus talk about, you know, all you need is affirmations. So
yeah,
everything to be like, I'm, you know, which are good, but you know, not in the absence of just being aware of, okay, you know what, that didn't go as well. And
yeah.
that's when I think self-talk is as more important. It's like, do you beat yourself up about it, or do you gonna go, let's acknowledge that, but say like, can I take the learning and move forward? That's a coaching mentality versus a you know, a critic mentality, but it's not ignoring things that didn't go well.
Interesting. I like what you just used about this sort of coaching mentality, sort of in self-taught, because again, this is something I kind of use in my training. Is I try and tell clients to have one rep inform the next one. So you're kind of having a conversation like, okay, that rep I literally just did. What could I do a little bit differently? Because you're having a conversation because you're trying to learn. Could you breathe a little bit differently? Could you be angled with your joints a little bit differently? Could you not be aggressive, but could you fire yourself up a little bit more again with your self talk? So the more aware you are of I suppose evaluating your what you're doing in the moment is kind of what we're trying to get really good at is how good you are being very, very present. So the more present you are with yourself and you understand yourself even better, you understand what words motivate you, what words drag you down, and you're kind of aware of how much of which you're using. Again, this is what's going to move you forward. But if you have no awareness of it, then you're not I suppose the point of what we're doing in this literally this podcast is trying to get across how powerful self talk is, how powerful words are. Everyone knows words are powerful. If I said a negative word to you, it make you feel bad. If I say a positive word to you, it make you feel quite good. So it's one of those things where you've kind of got to know. this is quite an important tool to try and put into your life, whether it's in training or relationships. Knowing that awareness of how you speak to yourself is what's gonna, make life work better for you. Just knowing yourself a little bit better, knowing what you say to yourself. You know?
Yeah, and I like that. I think, as you say, that's kind of the key outcome. Make life work better for you.
Yeah, yeah,
Because everyone's circumstances are different as well.
yeah,
People have got challenges out there, and there's no perfect scenario, and some more than others at a particular point in time. But how do you make that work as best you can? Because even if you're going through a tough period, at the very least, is your inner monologue or narratives being, at least kind to you at the very least,
mm,
versus harsh. And I've certainly experienced in my life kind of a very harsh inner monologue,
yeah.
and I wasn't aware of it and didn't think much of it, but actually that builds up, and as you said, that's not, it's not helping.
Mm. Um, we spoke something a little bit about something off camera, and again, I wasn't really sure if we were gonna sort of talk about it as much on camera. We talked about the idea of so as you grow up as a boy, you kind of have a vision of what you think a man is, right? So this is kind of in my mind again what I feel I deserve in terms of building this manly body, this very very strong body, right? Obviously, the reason why I bring it up is obviously this kind of pulls into the self talk you have in the gym, right? So you go in the gym and you go, okay, men show strength, men show grit, show determination. Don't break easily under the weight of the bar. You just kind of you're just trying to push through, right? Um, I suppose the point I'm trying to make is obviously the world has moved on from all that. We don't have to walk around with like a scowl on our face the whole time and be super stoic. And again, it's important to express emotions, but in the gym environment, showing toughness, showing grit, showing determination is important. So I suppose what the point I'm trying to make is the conversation and the self talk around that is men and women or boys and girls are socialized a little bit differently in terms of what men are told in terms of being tough and being strong and being hard, but women are told a slightly different story that it's okay to be not so tough. It's okay to be, a little bit just, I don't know, gentle, whatever. So what I kind of want our audience to kind of try and bring in out of this conversation is, as a woman, if you and are buying into that socialization, what could possibly be the health implications of fully buying into the implication or into the socialization that it's okay not to be strong, if that makes sense. So it's important to kind of go, yeah, it's not important. It's important not to be aggressive all the time and be like just moving around through the world as I don't know, like just really, really stoic and stuff. But in the gym, that toughness is important. In the gym, the grit is important. You have to be able to kind of talk yourself into leaning into discomfort, into applying pressure, man or woman. Everyone should be strong. I mean, this is an important way to kind of frame things, I don't know, from a self-talk perspective, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And as you say, we would hope that that's changing a bit, as you say, Italian. That's shifting a little bit. But certainly when I was first going to the gym, whatever 25 years ago type thing, that it was very much set. Often that they were the archetypes.
Yeah.
And and I think it links back to that kind of nurture, like what's the environment we're in, and is that at the end of the day, is it helping us get to a better place or not?
Yeah.
And I mean, I shared one example, and again, we're kind of being slightly using maybe just extreme examples to make the point, but this isn't something I made up. It's something that someone said to me. A friend who when she went to the gym, going to the free weights area, and you get a lot of guys and they're lifting and they're grunting and they're throwing weights down and all this kind of stuff, and she kind of felt like, well, I actually don't want to be in this environment, or I guess her inner voice was kind of saying, oh well, this isn't for you, when that's
Mm,
absolutely not accurate. And actually, I think the flip side of what you're saying is, an overextension of that inner voice. I think, again, I would say, Tanya, you've got a balanced one, but an overextension of that, men are tough, and I've got to be the toughest guy, can lead into ego lifting. And
mm,
actually, I remember we used the example, I think last time we spoke, was that, when that time I was in the gym with you and you were able to say, look around here, it's like, not only is that just ego lifting and it's kind of just ignorant and you're throwing weights around, it's kind of dangerous actually, is you're not achieving anything really because you're just lifting something just to show off, whereas actually, if you want to get the best outcome for your strength and your conditioning, you should be lifting weights that aren't that strong but doing more reps or whatever. That's where you're the expert. But it's just kind of ridiculous because you're just you're not even achieving a proper outcome. I mean, I think one mistake I made many years ago was again, that kind of those personas. Granted, you're young, and I got just a bench in my garage, and I was lifting. And years later, I remember going to an osteopath because I had back problems, and he was like, yeah, he's like, your body's quite strong because, but your flexibility is atrocious. And that's not a holistic sense of strength.
Yeah.
Because my mind is just like, just lift heavier. That's the way to go. And yes, there's an element to that, but in a way that doesn't compromise my flexibility. And I was pulling muscles, and I was suffering from serious back problems
Yeah.
because actually it wasn't in a balanced way.
Yeah.
Until again, Tanya, then that would have been supported by when we met, and your training approach was not just, okay, yes, it's about resistance training, but it's in a more holistic perspective. So yeah, I think that can go both ways. That example.
I mean, it's just. I think it's just interesting. Like I say, how society is kind of like, I don't know, forces people into this and that box. But again, if we all kind of look at where the information's come from, and kind of, I suppose what you said about nature and nurture is just how our nature makes us say certain things to ourselves about what is good and what is not good for us. And if we take our time to kind of really think about where our ideas come from, so the origins of our thoughts, then we get to a more balanced answer. So I suppose we're pursuing wisdom in as many areas as possible. And obviously, off the back of wisdom, we make better decisions, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I think that's well said. And I mean, the other point, I guess, because these things build up over time,
Yeah.
to some degree, it takes time to unravel them a little bit. So, as I say, this is a step by step approach. These things, we're not into quick wins.
Yeah.
That's what we talk about. I think
Yeah.
you can get started and you can make progress very quickly. But in terms of the broader sense of it, we're about like ongoing, sustainable approaches rather than quick wins in the sense of just a quick win, then you stop, and that's
Yeah.
it. The work's done. Yes, you can get like early wins
Yeah.
as part of that journey, but this is we're about how do you build a mentality and a mindset around this stuff that keeps you going. I mean, again, I think our ultimate goal and a win for us, Tanya, as we described it in the book, is that people don't need us anymore. They're going to go, I've got enough. Yeah, I'll check in from time to time. It's good if I've got something coming up or whatever, and it's nice to do that. But that people feel more self-sufficient and empowered to do this stuff.
Yeah.
That would be like a dream objective for us. And just coming back to this point, then is that this stuff starts with self-awareness. But if you found that, okay, I tend to be pretty harsh on myself, my inner voice is pretty negative, my self-talk is quite critical all the time, it's going to take time to shift that. There's a phrase well used in psychology as neurons that fire together wire together in neuroscience, and that means you need to repeat stuff,
Yeah.
because you keep to get them to fire, as in like, I am worth something, and actually I'm going to say I was good at that, and your brain starts to link that, going to go, okay, I was good at that, and that was a good outcome. And the more you do that, and to your example, Tanya, you're quite good at that, is they then become locked in. They're going to go, okay, now that becomes more common. You're getting a balanced self-talk rather than, often where people can be starting from. Some people that we've worked with, and that's why we are having this conversation today, is it tends to be much more on the negative side. And that can be, as we've talked about, a big blocker to really doing something differently and sustaining it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny as well because I think what I'm always trying to get across as well with this sort of self talk chat is I think people might just kind of only think about it applying to the gym, and I know this can maybe sound a bit neggy, but I apply it to nutrition as well. So I tell myself, for me, as a self talk in general, is I don't like weakness associated with me. So the idea of not being able to control myself around food is a weakness. So I suppose in general, what I'm always trying to get across, I think we talked about this a bit in the last episode, is words. make you feel something, the more emotionally invested you are in what you're doing, you're more likely to behave a certain way. So now, if I feel strongly about weakness not being part of me, then when I say to myself, when I kind of display behaviors where I'm not in control of how I eat, how I train, how I live, it makes me feel a certain way, and I'll behave a certain way. So a lot of what we do when it comes to self talk is understanding how those words make you feel, and if you can, for want of a better word, sort of trick yourself really into behaving how you know you should behave, visualizing or even thinking, how does the person I want to become, or how does the outcome I want to occur, how does that person behave? And then how does that make you feel? How does that outcome over there make you feel? Does this behavior align with that? These are words that you say to yourself that make you feel a certain way, that make you behave a certain way. So all your goals are very much tied to the way you speak to yourself, you know? So it's very powerful stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the kind of final thought from my side actually is that, and I can't remember who it was, a theorist or it's a coaching methodology or whatever else. The first time I heard it, to be honest, I thought it sounded a bit silly, but I've since kind of seen the kind of research behind it and the methodology. But the simple mantra is words become things, you know. And actually, what after kind of maybe my first response to that, I was actually like, no, you can see that, and that whatever school of thought you like to look through, what we've talked about, even manifestation
Yeah.
exercises, which people do a lot around, is those are all about the words and the intentions you're putting out there and how you're talking to yourself then to maybe achieve that, and that becomes reality. So this is, as you say, Tanya. Actually, it's powerful stuff, and people can kind of maybe throw it away to say, oh, it's just a bit of self talk. It's nothing wrong. It's like, no, this is key. This is really impactful and influential stuff. So totally agree with you.
Cool. Right. So let's not drag this out to like a 3 hour podcast. Like a lot of these podcasters would like to do, like to kind of really talk themselves up. Obviously, our intention is to be as helpful as possible and give you information that you can take away and use and start to really implement into your lives, into your training as quickly as possible. So what we always like to do at the end of these podcasts is finish off with some practical, useful tips you can use going into your next session, going into your attitude to food or whatever it is. What is the self talk? So, I don't know if you could sort of break down for us, Carl. What would you say? I don't know, practical things that someone can take away from this and start to implement now to kind of develop their self talk.
So, I mean, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think the main thing, I mean, you're right in that some people do more than others, but we all have self-talk. We're not constantly in dialogue with other people 24/7. So there are points that we are in our own heads. So as I said, the starting point with any of this is awareness. So I guess I would encourage anyone who's thinking about this is, of a day or of an afternoon, whatever, time you can, try and write down what your self-talk is saying, or even kind of get a balance, even to start, like, do I think it's positive, negative, or what's going on in my head? That takes a bit of time because it's often not, we're not consciously listening to it, if that makes sense. But particularly if you've, often we've got challenges during the day, during the work day, during our social lives. And if something happens, or particularly maybe if you didn't do something on time or whatever, you didn't do something in an ideal way, think about how you responded to yourself. Were you kind of in the car kind of effing and blinding about yourself, or were you kind of being a bit more compassionate and balanced to say, okay, right, I didn't get that in time, but I'll sort it tomorrow, or are you just kind of calling yourself names and things like that? So it's not, it feels a little high or loose as opposed to something really practical, but I find, like, if you actually write it down and things like that and kind of capture, say, oh, that's interesting, I didn't notice I actually was kind of I was being a bit unkind to myself, or vice versa, is the starting point. And the ultimate goal with this stuff is that in the moment you can catch yourself to say, okay, come on now, let's not be too harsh again. And it's always that sense check is, would you speak to somebody else like that? And I find 9 times out of 10 when I ask that question, people to go, absolutely, I would never speak to someone the way I'm speaking to myself. And so I'd say that's the starting point. And then from there, there's kind of various things you can do ultimately to reframe it. But once you catch yourself, and ultimately, if you just bear in mind, it's not good to be self-critical all the time, that's a great starting point.
It's really funny. So I don't know if I can get it up right now. What I've written for myself personally. Let me see. So I always talk about this kind of stuff when it comes to self-talk as like self-parenting, if you like. So I suppose what I've kind of framed for myself, and I've spoken to my clients about. Let me see if I can find it. Is basically your self-talk should be like you should be like a good parent, right? So we're thinking about being obviously loving and encouraging and supportive with kind of how you speak to yourself, right? But at the same time, a good parent should be able to kind of scold you necessarily. I'm Nigerian, so I'm used to harsh talk if necessary.
Yeah.
So it should be able to kind of call you on your bullshit, long and short of it. So it's and this is kind of where I think I don't want to generalize and say society's changing, whatever, but it's like sometimes we've got to call ourselves on our bullshit. We've got to go, okay, you've got to kind of be responsible. Not everything we do in life you have to like. Some things you just have to do because it's the right thing to do. Some things are just hard, and you just accept it's hard and go, okay, I can do that hard thing. And again, this kind of language, literally, I can do that hard thing, is what you say to yourself often. And the more often you say this to yourself, and you believe and you prove it, again, this is build self-belief, it builds self-confidence. So for me, it's as a start, is this, we talked about this a bit last week, is this growth mindset, fixed mindset, is I can do this. I'm strong, I can do this, I'm capable. So the more you actually believe you are, and you prove this to yourself by your behavior, this is the power for me of self-talk. So yes, be encouraging, be supportive, be loving to yourself, but be truthful. Like, be honest. Being honest with yourself, it goes a long way. But again, there's loads of ways. I mean, suppose literally like you said, like if you were speaking to like your nephew, your son, your daughter, your family member, and you wanted to show them encouragement, you wanted to bring the best out of them. Are you speaking to yourself in the same way? And if you're not speaking to yourself in that way, then I don't know, how do you expect that person to succeed? And the same applies to how you speak to yourself.
100%.
So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's I couldn't say anything more than that. Tanya, that's a great way to, I think, summarize. And
Awesome. All right. Always a pleasure to see you, Carl.
absolutely, mate.
Right. I was Tanya Nekio Amado, and this is
Really, folks. So
cool. See you guys on the next one. I think what we said we'll discuss on the next one would be about possibly. Let's have a look here. Mind traps and drivers is what I was thinking we could discuss on the next one.
yep.
So let's discuss that on the next podcast. See you guys on the other side.
Cheers.
Cheers.